The phone call began at 11:47 p.m. A quiet moment on the line, followed by a voice that would eventually turn an entire investigation upside down. It was Jennifer Gledhill, calm, composed, and reaching out to report her husband missing. On the surface, it sounded like a worried wife seeking help. But within minutes, detectives would sense that something about this call would carry far more weight than they realized. This wasn't just another late-night report. It was the start of a chain of events that would tear apart a family, shock a community, and uncover a story far more unsettling than anyone expected. Within days, officers would step into the Johnson home and find signs that didn't match Jennifer's version of the night. Within weeks, her closest confidant would come forward with recordings that chilled even the most experienced investigators. And within months, the search for a respected soldier, a father of 3, would stretch across northern Utah with no end in sight. A missing husband, a flawless home, a carefully rehearsed narrative, and a secret so deeply hidden that the truth had to be dragged out one confession at a time. Tonight, we're going to walk through the disturbing timeline of Jennifer Gledhill and Matthew Johnson, a couple whose public life looked peaceful, but whose final months were filled with tension, betrayal, and choices no one saw coming. And it all begins with that late-night call. Before the late-night call, before the strange details, before the recordings surfaced, there was a family that seemed, from the outside, to be living a life most people only dream of. Jennifer Gledhill and Matthew Johnson lived in Cottonwood Heights, Utah, a quiet, upscale community lined with clean streets, trimmed lawns, and million-dollar homes. To neighbors, they were the picture of stability. A devoted father, a caring mother, 3 bright children filling the house with the usual noise and energy of a young family. Matthew Johnson, at 51, wasn't just any husband or father. He was a respected member of the Utah National Guard's 19th Special Forces Group, a Green Beret who had spent more than a decade serving his country. Those who worked beside him described him as reliable, intelligent, and steady in every situation. The kind of man people leaned on for answers. Jennifer, at 42, was known as the woman who always greeted you with a polite smile. She attended school events, stayed involved with her children, and was often described as pleasant, soft-spoken, someone who preferred the comfort of home over anything else. Friends who visited the family said the same thing. They looked perfect. They looked happy. The sort of couple you wouldn't think twice about. The kind of household where trouble seemed unlikely. Inside that home, though, things were far more complicated. By the summer of 2024, the marriage had been struggling for months. Arguments had grown more frequent. Tension settled into the daily routine in ways only the two of them could fully understand. What no one realized then was how quickly these cracks would spread, and how deeply they would cut into everything the family had built. For now, the world still saw a stable family. Behind closed doors, the story was already changing. As the months moved toward late summer, the picture-perfect image surrounding the Gledhill, Johnson household began to slip. Not publicly, not in any way neighbors could point to, but quietly, silently inside the walls of their home. By July 2024, the marriage had reached a point where separation seemed inevitable. Arguments weren't occasional anymore. They were routine, heated, and draining. Conversations that once ended in compromise now ended with frustration and distance. Jennifer took a step that surprised everyone who later heard about it. She filed for a temporary protective order against Matthew. To anyone on the outside, it sounded serious. A wife asking for court protection from her husband usually signals real danger. But when the case reached the courtroom, a very different story emerged. 3rd District Commissioner Russell Minus reviewed the evidence Jennifer provided, videos, messages, and claims that she needed protection. Instead of supporting her version, the evidence showed something else entirely. The videos did not reveal fear. They revealed confrontation. 2 people arguing, yes, but with Jennifer matching Matthew's energy, standing her ground, showing no signs of intimidation. Her messages to him were harsh, demeaning, and filled with insults that went far beyond anger. In his written findings, the commissioner noted that Jennifer appeared to be provoking, pushing, almost trying to force a reaction out of Matthew. When the ruling came, it carried a weight no one could ignore. The protective order was dismissed. No abuse found. No indication Matthew was a threat. Then the commissioner wrote something that would later echo through the entire case. The conduct of the parties over the past several months is representative of a highly dysfunctional marriage. This situation should have been addressed long before reaching this point. It was a statement meant to summarize months of tension. But in hindsight, it reads like a warning, one that no one realized the urgency of at the time. Because while the court was closing the chapter on a failed protective order, Jennifer was opening the door to something far more dangerous. The marriage had reached a breaking point. But instead of walking away, someone in the home had already made a choice that would ensure there'd be no divorce. Whatever hope remained for repairing the relationship was gone, and the next decisions made inside that house would change everything. As September drew closer, the strain inside the marriage reached a level that could no longer be ignored. Matthew Johnson, a man trained for some of the most demanding situations a soldier can face, began showing signs of fear in his own home. Friends noticed it first. He wasn't sleeping much. He appeared exhausted, distracted, carrying the kind of heaviness that sticks to a person. And then he made a decision that would later speak louder than any official report. He stopped sleeping at home. Instead, Matthew spent the final weeks of his life staying at a Utah National Guard facility. Not because of work, not because of military obligations, but because he felt safer there. According to those closest to him, Jennifer's behavior had become unpredictable and unsettling. Moments of calm would shift into anger without warning. Arguments escalated faster. And Matthew, a man who had faced high-risk missions overseas, felt the tension so deeply that he preferred a military bunk over his own bed. One of the last people to speak with Matthew was Kevin Thompson, a longtime friend and retired Utah Guardsman. In their conversation, Kevin could hear how worn down Matthew had become, how ready he finally was to move on. Matthew told him plainly, he needed a divorce. He wanted a fresh start. He wanted peace. But Kevin didn't realize he was speaking to Matthew during the last days of his life. He didn't know those words, simple, honest, exhausted words, would never be followed by action. Because while Matthew was preparing to leave the marriage, Jennifer was preparing to end it in a way no one imagined. What Matthew didn't see, what he couldn't have known, was that someone in his home was already living another life entirely. Someone who had made emotional commitments elsewhere. Someone whose conversations, messages, and late-night thoughts were no longer centered around saving a marriage, but around removing an obstacle. And while Matthew was searching for safety, Jennifer was moving toward a decision that would take away his future, his freedom, and ultimately his life. Matthew thought distance would protect him. He had no idea how wrong he was. While Matthew was trying to distance himself from the tension at home, Jennifer was drifting even farther away, not just emotionally, but into an entirely separate life she kept hidden from her husband. It began quietly. Messages, meetups, moments that built into something far more intense than anyone around her realized. Jennifer wasn't simply frustrated with her marriage. She had attached herself to another man, someone who would eventually become the key to uncovering everything that happened. This wasn't a casual affair. It had intensity, secrecy, and a level of emotional dependence that consumed her attention. Those who later reviewed the communications between Jennifer and her lover described a woman deeply invested, willing to bend the truth and reality itself to keep the relationship alive. And as this hidden relationship grew stronger, her connection to Matthew grew weaker. 2 days before the murder, on September 19, 2024, Jennifer did something that would later be seen as a warning no one caught in time. She showed her lover a firearm, a Glock 19X she kept in the home. To him, it might have looked like nothing more than a moment of misplaced trust, an impulsive decision from someone trying to appear open or bold. But prosecutors would later say this was the moment Jennifer revealed more than she intended. This was the weapon that would soon become central to the case. This was the object that connected her private life, her home life, and the tragedy that was about to unfold. Behind closed doors, Jennifer was juggling two worlds, the familiar life she shared with Matthew, and an entirely separate identity that existed only when she was with her lover. Two conflicting realities, overlapping in dangerous ways. She wasn't just drifting away from her marriage. She was reorganizing her life around a different future, one that didn't include Matthew at all. And as she grew closer to the man outside her marriage, Jennifer made a quiet series of choices that would soon reveal her intentions. She arranged for the children to stay at her parents' home. She cleared the schedule in her own household. She positioned events in a way that left one person isolated and vulnerable. Matthew had been preparing for divorce. Jennifer had been preparing for something far more final. The double life that she had kept hidden was starting to shape decisions that no one around her could see, and every step she took brought her closer to a point she could never return from. September 20th, 2024, began like any other day inside the Johnson, Gledhill home. But by nightfall, the calm routine of a Friday evening had slipped into something far more volatile. Something that would never be undone. Matthew had finally uncovered the truth he'd been sensing for weeks. Jennifer's secret life. Her affair. The messages she'd been hiding. The emotional attachment she'd formed with someone outside their marriage. And that night, he confronted her. Neighbors would later describe raised voices coming from inside the home, a heated argument carried by months of frustration, betrayal, and exhaustion. Arguments happen in marriages, especially in those nearing an end. But this one marked a turning point. According to Jennifer's later confession, Matthew yelled at her, accusing her of sleeping with someone else. After weeks of suspicion, he finally had confirmation. And for the first time, he voiced exactly how deeply it cut him. But what Matthew never realized was that he wasn't just confronting an unfaithful spouse. He was confronting someone who had already made up her mind about what must happen next. Later, prosecutors would point to this argument as the moment Jennifer decided to follow through with a choice she had been preparing for quietly, methodically, and without hesitation. A choice that had nothing to do with reconciliation, and everything to do with removing the one person standing between her and the future she imagined. As the argument faded into silence, Matthew retreated to the bedroom, the same room where countless memories had been made over the years. The same place where he had once found rest, comfort, and safety. By the time the house grew quiet, Matthew had fallen asleep. Exhausted, unaware, completely defenseless. Jennifer, however, remained awake. She had already arranged for the children to be away for the night. She had already shown the gun to her lover days earlier. She had already framed the argument in a way that positioned herself as the victim. And now, with the house silent and Matthew asleep, she approached the moment that would shatter every life connected to this family. In the early hours of September 21st, inside a dark bedroom lit only by faint shadows, Jennifer walked toward the bed with a 9mm handgun, Matthew's own firearm. He never stirred. He never opened his eyes. He never saw what was coming. One shot. A single decision carried out while the man she had once promised a lifetime to lay motionless and unaware. The aftermath wasn't panic. It wasn't shock. It wasn't grief. According to Jennifer's own confession, what followed next was a series of deliberate actions. Steps taken with purpose, focus, and a clarity that investigators would later describe as deeply disturbing. She dragged Matthew's body from the bed. She placed him into a rooftop storage container from the garage. A container meant for seasonal decorations or household items, now repurposed into something unthinkable. And with a strength powered by intention, she slid the container down the stairs. Each impact echoing through a home that had just become a crime scene. The plan she had been building quietly, piece by piece, was now in full motion. Matthew had gone to bed believing the argument had ended. He didn't know it was the last night of his life. And the cover-up that followed would become one of the most shocking parts of this case. Because Jennifer wasn't finished. What came next would show investigators just how far she was willing to go to erase what she had done. After Matthew Johnson was killed inside his own bedroom, Jennifer did not pause. She did not call for help. She did not show signs of panic. Instead, she moved through the house with a level of focus that stunned investigators when they pieced it all together later. With Matthew's body sealed inside the rooftop storage container, she dragged it toward the garage. The thud of the container hitting each step marked a new stage of the plan she had set in motion long before that night. She lifted the container into the family minivan, a vehicle meant for school trips, family outings, weekend drives. Now it was being used for something else entirely. But before leaving the neighborhood, Jennifer took several calculated steps to ensure police would lose track of Matthew's movements. She smashed his phone, destroying his last digital trail. As she got into his truck and drove it to a nearby neighborhood, abandoning it several blocks from their home. She then returned to the minivan and began her drive north, toward a location that detectives, soldiers, and search teams are still trying to uncover. According to Jennifer's later confession to her lover, she buried Matthew in a shallow grave somewhere in northern Utah. No one knows exactly where. Despite months of searches, mapping, and tracking, Matthew's body has not been found. When Jennifer returned home, she transformed the house from a crime scene into what she hoped would look like an ordinary, untouched bedroom. She cleaned the walls. She scrubbed the carpet. She used bleach to remove stains she believed investigators would never notice. Then she made a decision that would later become one of the most important pieces of evidence. She ordered a new mattress. Phone records show the order was placed on September 24th, just 3 days after the killing. The old mattress, the one Matthew died on, was gone. In its place, a brand new one arrived at the home on September 26th, as if nothing had ever happened. Carpet cleaner, bleach, a new mattress, a rearranged room. Each step was part of a coordinated effort to erase every trace of what took place inside that bedroom. But what Jennifer didn't realize was that blood, especially blood exposed to impact, has a way of settling into places that ordinary cleaning can't reach. Under the bed, along the edge of the frame, on the slats just inches below where Matthew had been lying. The truth was still there, waiting for investigators. But even after the cleanup, even after the mattress was replaced, Jennifer made one more decision, the one that would ultimately unravel everything. She went to see her lover. Late on September 22nd, just before midnight, Jennifer showed up at his home. Not distressed, not shaken, but ready to talk. She told him what she had done. She described the argument. She described the shot. She described dragging Matthew's body down the stairs. She described burying him. And she described cleaning the house afterward. Her lover noticed bruises on her arms and legs. When he asked about them, she told him they came from preparing her husband's grave. It was the beginning of a confession that would send shockwaves through the entire case. Because the man she confided in would soon become the person who destroyed her alibi. Jennifer had rewritten the story inside her home. But through her own words, she had already exposed the truth. And the next step she took, a phone call she believed was safe, would seal everything. After confessing face to face, Jennifer made one more mistake, one that would become the most damaging evidence in the entire investigation. She picked up the phone. She called the same man she had confessed to, and she believed he was still on her side. But he wasn't. Not anymore. Her lover had spent the night thinking about what she told him, replaying her words, picturing the things she described. The calmness, the casual tone, the way she explained the bruises on her body, as if they were nothing more than marks from a day of chores. By the next morning, he was terrified, not just for himself, but for what Jennifer might be capable of if anything threatened her plan. So he did the only thing he could think of. He prepared to record her. At 11:47 p.m., the phone call began. A soft click on the line, followed by Jennifer's voice, steady, familiar, unbothered. She didn't hesitate. She didn't try to hide anything. She spoke the same way she had spoken the night before. And what she said next would later be played in a courtroom filled with detectives, attorneys, and family members who could barely process what they were hearing. Her lover told her he was frightened by everything she had revealed. Frightened by her confession. Frightened by her tone. Frightened by the idea that someone could describe such actions without emotion. Jennifer's response was chilling. Wow, if you think I could even hurt a fly. A pause. A sigh. And then the sentence that would echo through the investigation. He wasn't a person. He wasn't mad anymore. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't grief. It was detachment, complete and cold. As detectives later listened to the recording, they couldn't ignore what they were hearing. A woman who had emotionally separated herself from the man she had been married to for years. A woman who was speaking about her husband as though he were an object, not a life. But the call didn't stop there. Her lover, frightened of what she was capable of, asked her a question. Would she be afraid if the situation were reversed? If someone decided the same thing about her? Jennifer answered, "Not if I deserved it." And then she said something that left investigators stunned. She joked that in a past life, she must have been a queen who ordered punishments without hesitation, as if decisions about life and death were simply part of her personality. Throughout the call, she asked him not to judge her, not to think of her as a monster, to remember the version of her she tried to present before everything came to the surface. But she couldn't erase what she had already said. She couldn't take back the way she described Matthew. And she couldn't undo the tone, that calmness that carried more weight than any words on a page ever could. Most alarming of all, this conversation took place before anyone reported Matthew missing, which meant that Jennifer, hours before calling police, was already speaking as though her husband's life had ended long ago. Her lover saved the recording. He saved the texts. He saved every message she sent. Because by this point, he knew one thing. If he didn't come forward, no one might ever know the truth. This phone call, the call Jennifer believed would stay between them, became the piece of evidence that broke open the entire case. It was the moment the investigation shifted. It was the moment police would soon uncover a story nothing in Jennifer's initial report could explain. The truth was now on tape, and her scripted version of events was about to fall apart. 6 days passed after Jennifer's confession to her lover. 6 days in which she lived her life as though nothing had happened. 6 days in which Matthew's absence went unexplained, unanswered, and unnoticed outside their home. And then, on September 28th, just before midnight, Jennifer finally picked up the phone and reported her husband missing. The timing alone raised questions for investigators later on. Why wait nearly a week? Why call now? Why did her voice sound controlled instead of frantic? During the 11:47 p.m. call, Jennifer told officers that Matthew had said he would be gone for a week, that he told her not to contact him, and that she didn't know where he was. But while she was portraying a calm, confused wife, the reality was far different. Because while Jennifer was making that call, the Utah National Guard had already been searching for Matthew for days. He had failed to report for duty on September 23rd, something completely out of character for a man known for reliability and discipline. For the Guard, Matthew's absence was immediately alarming. For Jennifer, she waited almost a full week before mentioning it to authorities. And she had no idea that by the time she made that call, the most important evidence against her was already in someone else's hands. Her lover had become more frightened with each passing day. Frightened by the details she had revealed. Frightened by her tone. Frightened by the possibility that she could harm again if someone stood between her and her plans. He took screenshots of their messages. He saved every confession. He held on to the recording of their late-night phone call, the one where she described Matthew as if he weren't human anymore. But for several days, he stayed silent. It wasn't until October 2nd, nearly 2 weeks after the murder, that he finally walked into a police station with everything he had. The audio recordings, the texts, his full account of what Jennifer told him. And that was the moment the investigation shifted from a missing person report to a full-fledged homicide case. But before police could act on the recordings, before they could arrest anyone, they needed to see the house for themselves. On September 28th, the same day Jennifer reported her husband missing, officers entered the Johnson, Gledhill home under a search warrant. And the moment they stepped inside the master bedroom, they found a scene that told a story very different from the one Jennifer described. A massive bloodstain hidden beneath the bed, blood droplets on the blinds, spots on the walls, a heavy smell of bleach lingering in the air, and a mattress that was obviously brand new. Each detail contradicted the calm story Jennifer gave during the missing person call. Investigators didn't know everything yet. They didn't know about the storage container. They didn't know about the shallow grave. They didn't know about the GPS data. But they knew one simple, unmistakable truth the moment they stepped into that bedroom. Matthew Johnson had not walked out of that house on his own. The missing person report was only the beginning. And the evidence waiting inside the walls of that home would confirm that the story Jennifer told was an illusion. One that was about to collapse completely. By the time investigators reached the Johnson Gledhill home, the missing person story Jennifer gave over the phone was already losing its shape. Something felt off. Something didn't match. And the moment detectives walked into the master bedroom, every doubt they had became impossible to ignore. The room Jennifer had described as ordinary was anything but. It began with a faint chemical smell, sharp enough to catch attention. A smell that didn't belong in a bedroom, where someone simply packed a bag and left for a week. Bleach. Detectives followed the scent to the walls and floor, where they discovered faint discoloration that suggested scrubbing. Not once, but several times. They searched around the baseboards, and that's where the first sign appeared. Reddish-brown spots. Small. Scattered. But unmistakable. Then they moved the bed. What they found next told the real story. Underneath the frame, hidden by the placement of the furniture, was a large bloodstain soaked deep into the carpet. It wasn't surface level. It wasn't something that happened by accident. It was the kind of stain that required force, the kind detectives recognized immediately. Blood had also settled onto the wooden slats beneath the mattress, forming a pattern entirely consistent with someone being harmed on the bed itself. And when the investigators examined the mattress, they realized why nothing matched the scene Jennifer described in her report. The mattress was brand new. Still crisp. Still clean. Still bearing the manufacturer's smell. Phone records would later show exactly when it was purchased. September 24th. Just 3 days after Matthew's death. The replacement wasn't subtle. It was rushed. It was deliberate. Detectives then widened their search. They checked the blinds, more faint stains. The baseboards, more signs of scrubbing. The carpet, areas that had been cleaned unevenly, as though the person doing it wiped quickly instead of professionally. Everything pointed to one conclusion: a violent event had taken place in this room. But this wasn't the only discovery waiting inside the home. Investigators soon found evidence of carpet cleaning products scattered in the trash, a receipt for bleach, and household supplies that matched the timeline outlined in Jennifer's later confession. Every corner of the room held a piece of the truth she tried to erase. But perhaps the most revealing sign wasn't on the floor or the walls. It was the absence of something else. There were no signs Matthew packed anything. No clothes missing. No overnight bag. No wallet prepared. No preparation for a week-long disappearance. Nothing to support the story Jennifer had told during her missing person call. While detectives were piecing together the scene inside the home, the timeline outside the home was becoming clearer through digital evidence. GPS data from Jennifer's phone showed her movements on September 21st and 22nd, including a stop at the exact location where Matthew's truck was found abandoned at dawn, and her later trip north, the same route she claimed she took while transporting Matthew's body. Every detail aligned with her lover's confession. Every signal contradicted her own report. The house had spoken. The evidence was too clear to ignore. And although investigators still didn't know where Matthew was buried, they understood one thing with absolute certainty. Matthew Johnson never left this home alive. The walls told the truth she tried to clean away. The floor revealed what she attempted to hide. And the stains beneath the bed marked the exact place where everything changed. Now, with physical evidence supporting the recorded confession, detectives were ready to take the next step. Jennifer Gledhill's story had collapsed, and the arrest was only hours away. With the house revealing details Jennifer never expected investigators to find, and with the recorded phone call now in police hands, the case shifted from confusion to certainty. Everything pointed in one direction. Everything led back to Jennifer Gledhill. On October 2nd, 2024, detectives arrived at the Cottonwood Heights home with a clear purpose. They weren't there to ask more questions. They weren't there to search for another explanation. They were there to make an arrest. Jennifer appeared calm when they approached her. Not tearful, not frantic, not confused. She greeted officers the way someone might greet unexpected guests, not the police about to charge her with taking a life. But this time, the officers had something no one could talk their way out of. The recording where she described Matthew as if he were no longer a person. Her admission that she shot him while he slept. Her description of dragging his body down the stairs. Her explanation for the bruises she got burying him. The physical evidence in the home matching every detail she shared in private. A GPS data showing her exact movements. And a timeline that contradicted everything she had told police. When detectives informed her she was being taken into custody for first-degree murder, Jennifer did not break down. She didn't deny anything. She didn't demand a lawyer on the spot. She simply went quiet. It was the kind of silence that detectives often talk about later. A silence that carries acceptance of everything that led to that moment. As she was handcuffed and placed into the patrol car, neighbors stepped outside to watch. Some stood frozen on their driveways. Others whispered in disbelief. A wife reporting her husband, missing only days earlier, was now being taken away for the one thing she insisted she had nothing to do with. But the arrest didn't close the case. Instead, it opened the door to another set of questions investigators were now prepared to explore. Questions that stretched beyond Jennifer herself. Because when detectives examined the timeline surrounding the cleanup, the purchases, the erased data, and the newly replaced mattress, something didn't add up. The hours Jennifer claimed were spent alone didn't match her phone records. The time she said she cleaned didn't align with the housing logs. And there were unexplained activities around the home involving people who claimed they barely visited. Investigators began to realize that Jennifer wasn't the only person who might have helped after Matthew's death. There were fingerprints. There were inconsistent statements. There were odd gaps in phone data from two people who had every reason to protect Jennifer. Her parents. As Jennifer sat inside the county jail that night, facing charges that carried the possibility of life behind bars, another part of the investigation was already in motion. Detectives were preparing for the next step, a step that would reveal just how far this cover-up stretched, and who might have joined her in trying to erase Matthew Johnson from his own home. The truth was falling into place, but the case was about to expand far beyond Jennifer herself. After Jennifer's arrest, detectives shifted their attention to the people closest to her, those who might have known more than they admitted, and those whose actions in the days after the killing didn't line up with the stories they gave police. At the top of that list were her parents, Thomas and Rosalie Gledhill. During the early stages of the investigation, Thomas and Rosalie insisted they had only stopped by Jennifer's house for a short visit. Less than an hour, they claimed, and only to pick up clothing for the children. But the timeline didn't match. Phone data showed them at the home for more than 5 hours. 5 hours spent inside a house where bleach had clearly been used, where the carpet had been cleaned, and where a new mattress had been ordered only days earlier. Investigators also noticed something else during their interviews. Rosalie's phone had been remotely reset, wiping out her data from the exact period when the cleanup would have taken place. No photos, no messages, no location history. To detectives, that wasn't a coincidence. It was an attempt to remove digital tracks. Then there was Thomas. When questioned about where he went inside the home, he made a statement that shocked the detectives sitting across from him. He said, "I didn't go in where the incident happened. No one had mentioned an incident. No one had described a location. No one had told him where the crime occurred." With that single sentence, Thomas unintentionally revealed knowledge he should not have had, unless he was involved after the fact. Detectives returned to the family home with this new information and searched not only Matthew and Jennifer's residence, but the Gledhill parents' home as well. What they found deepened the case. Inside a plastic storage tote, wrapped inside a child's onesie, was a Glock 19X gun box, the same model Jennifer had shown her lover just days before the murder. Why was it hidden inside their home? Why was it wrapped in a child's clothing? Why had no one mentioned it? To investigators, these weren't oversights. These were signs of involvement, intentional, quiet, and carried out behind the scenes. With the cumulative evidence, police concluded that Thomas and Rosalie weren't simply parents visiting their daughter. They were participants in the cover-up. On October 24, 2024, they were arrested and charged with 4 counts of obstruction of justice. The arrests sent shockwaves through the community. People who had known the Gledhills for years couldn't understand how 2 parents, nearing their 70s, could be connected to something so serious. But investigators had seen this pattern before. When someone commits a crime that threatens to destroy a family, those closest to them sometimes step in, not out of logic, not out of strategy, but out of blind loyalty. Even with all 3 arrests, Jennifer and both her parents, one devastating reality remained. Matthew Johnson was still missing. Detectives had the confession. They had the blood evidence. They had the timeline. But without Matthew's body, the case had a hole. A painful one that Matthew's children, his friends, and his fellow soldiers felt every day. And so the search began. A search that would stretch across counties, grow over months, and involve dozens of people determined to bring him home. The truth behind the cover-up was nearly complete. But the most important part, Matthew himself, was still nowhere to be found. Even with Jennifer in custody, and her parents now facing charges of their own, the investigation was far from over. Because at the heart of this case, beyond the recordings, beyond the evidence, beyond the court filings, one painful truth remained. Matthew Johnson still hadn't been found. From the very beginning, the search for Matthew was more than just a mission for law enforcement. It became a personal vow carried by people who knew him, loved him, and refused to let his story end without answers. Search teams spread across northern Utah, from the open fields of Davis County, to the brush-covered areas of Weber County, to the remote stretches reaching toward the Idaho border. Over 70 searchers joined the effort. Local law enforcement, volunteers, friends from the military, people who had never met Matthew but felt compelled to help. Helicopters scanned the landscape. Drones mapped isolated terrain. Ground teams walked mile after mile, covering rugged areas where a shallow grave could be hidden under soil, brush, or debris. And yet, there was no sign of him. For Matthew's friends in the Special Forces community, the search became something deeper. They had served beside him. They had relied on him. They had trusted him with their lives. And now, they were searching for him with a determination fueled by loyalty and loss. One of those men, John Hash, a Green Beret who served with Matthew for 12 years, spoke openly about the impact this case had on all of them. He said that the idea of Jennifer being responsible was almost impossible to comprehend at first. He had welcomed her into his home. He had sat across the table from her. He had believed they were simply another military family, doing their best through tough times. His voice carried a mix of grief and disbelief as he explained what it felt like to know that Matthew's final moments were spent alone, vulnerable, and unaware of the danger in his own home. But the search wasn't only emotional. It soon became backed by new evidence. Investigators discovered a vehicle storage container floating in water during the search effort. Inside that container, they found something that connected back to the night Matthew was killed: his blood. The container matched the description of the one Jennifer had used to move Matthew's body. A bright, heavy case meant for hauling equipment. Now a crucial piece of evidence showing that his remains had been transported exactly the way she described in her confession. This discovery confirmed everything investigators feared. Matthew's body had been moved across counties. Moved with purpose. Hidden somewhere only Jennifer could identify. Each time detectives followed a new lead, it brought them closer to understanding the full scope of what Jennifer had done, but never close enough to bring Matthew home. For his children, the waiting was unbearable. They didn't just lose their father. They lost their mother to a jail cell, their grandparents to charges, and the life they once knew to a truth that shattered everything. For Matthew's friends, the nights were long. The uncertainty never faded, and the idea that a man who spent his life serving others could vanish without a trace was something none of them could accept. Even today, teams continue to comb through land across northern Utah, hoping for that one moment, that one clue, that will finally end this painful chapter. The evidence was mounting. The timeline was clear. The confessions were recorded. The charges were filed. But without Matthew, this case felt incomplete. He was a father, a soldier, a friend, a man whose life mattered. And somewhere in the wide, quiet landscape of northern Utah, he was still waiting to be found. As the search for Matthew continued, investigators were building the legal case piece by piece. Every recording, every GPS point, every stain inside the home, every action Jennifer took before and after that September night, all of it was now heading toward a courtroom that would determine her fate. Jennifer Gledhill was formally charged with first-degree murder, multiple counts of obstruction of justice, abuse or desecration of a human body, tampering with a witness, possession of a controlled substance. A charge list as heavy as the evidence behind it. During her hearings, Jennifer appeared calm, the same calmness captured on the recorded phone call. No tears, no visible panic, no outward sign of remorse or fear. Prosecutors, however, made their position clear. They argued that Jennifer posed a significant danger to the community, not only because of what she had already admitted to doing, but because of what she said after the fact. In the recorded call, she told her lover that she would rather end her own life than go to prison. To prosecutors, this wasn't just a comment made in the heat of the moment. It was evidence that she might harm herself before trial, or attempt to influence anyone connected to the case. They also emphasized the calculated nature of the crime, arranging for her children to be away from the home, disposing of the body, cleaning the scene, ordering a new mattress, and maintaining a fabricated story for nearly a week before even calling police. Nothing about it was impulsive. Every step followed a sequence, and when the defense requested bail, prosecutors didn't hesitate. They argued that releasing Jennifer would risk the integrity of the investigation, that she could interfere with witnesses, destroy remaining evidence, or influence those involved in the cover-up, including her own parents. The judge agreed. Jennifer was denied bail. She was ordered to remain in custody at the Salt Lake County Jail until trial. But even as she awaited her day in court, another issue emerged. One that raised questions of motive, finances, and what Jennifer may have stood to gain. Matthew Johnson had a $500,000 life insurance policy, a substantial amount of money, life-changing money, and Jennifer was the beneficiary. With murder charges now pending, the insurance company refused to release the payout. Instead, they asked the court to determine who, if anyone, should receive the funds. This opened a new legal battle, a fight between the charged defendant, Matthew's extended family, and the possibility that the children might one day become rightful recipients. For prosecutors, the insurance policy wasn't presented as the only motive, but it added weight to their theory. Jennifer wanted freedom. She wanted control. She wanted to continue her relationship with her lover. She wanted to avoid the conflict, debt, and custody fight that would come with a divorce. And she wanted access to money Matthew had earned through years of service. But the most telling part of the courtroom proceedings came not from prosecutors, not from the defense, but from the victim's family. In a written statement through their representative, Matthew's loved ones said. "We are hopeful that we will find Matt soon, or that Jennifer, or someone else, will come forward with the location of his body, so he can be laid to rest properly." Their words carried the weight of months of grief, months of searching, and months of uncertainty with no clear end. The courtroom could address the charges. The judge could order Jennifer to stay behind bars. The state could begin preparing for trial. But none of it answered the question that mattered most. Where was Matthew? And as the trial date was set for December 8th, 2025, one truth settled over the entire case. The legal fight had begun, but the story was far from over. Because justice could proceed. But closure, true closure, would only come when Matthew was finally found. The courtroom was ready. The evidence was prepared. The witnesses were waiting. As the case moved into the court system and the search for Matthew carried on, the ripples of Jennifer Gledhill's choices reached far beyond police files, hearings, and evidence boards. The aftermath of this case wasn't limited to a crime scene or a courtroom. It spread into the lives of 3 children, 2 families, a military community, and an entire region waiting for answers. The Johnson, Gledhill children, once surrounded by both parents in a home filled with structure and routine, were suddenly left without either one. Their father was gone. Their mother was in jail. Their grandparents were facing charges of their own. In an instant, the foundation of their lives had collapsed. They lost the home where they grew up. They lost the parent who had tucked them in at night. And they lost the parent who was supposed to protect them, not destroy everything they knew. Friends of the family described the children as resilient, but no child is prepared for this kind of loss. For Matthew's extended family, the grief was a constant companion. They were mourning without a place to mourn. They were hurting without answers. They were facing the reality that they still had no place to visit, no grave to stand beside, no final moment to say goodbye. And for his fellow soldiers, men who trained with him, traveled with him, trusted him, the hurt ran deep. Special Forces members are known for strength, endurance, and composure under pressure. But when they spoke about Matthew, their voices carried a heaviness that only comes from losing one of their own. Their teammate wasn't missing because of combat. He wasn't lost in a mission overseas. He wasn't taken by an accident or an illness. He was gone because of something that happened inside his own home. And because the person accused of taking his life was someone the unit once welcomed into their circle. Someone they thought they understood. The pain had another layer, a layer shaped by disbelief and betrayal. Even within the community of Cottonwood Heights, neighbors struggled to grasp what had unfolded. People drove past the Johnson, Gledhill home in silence, trying to reconcile the peaceful exterior with the reality of what took place inside those walls. Some spoke about seeing the family at school events. Others remembered waving to Matthew in the mornings. A few had invited Jennifer into their homes, not knowing the turmoil that lived behind her quiet smile. And yet, through all the loss and shock, one group refused to give up. Matthew's friends. They organized search efforts on their own. They walked through fields, ravines, and dense brush. They studied maps and GPS data. They followed every lead, not because they were told to, but because Matthew mattered to them. One of his longtime friends said the search kept him awake at night. Another explained that leaving Matthew unfound felt like leaving a teammate behind, something they could never accept. The months dragged on, and the landscape of northern Utah held on to its secret. Every passing day felt heavier than the last. Court dates were set. Documents were filed. Attorneys prepared their cases. But the one thing everyone needed, the one thing that would give this story an ending instead of a pause, remained out of reach. Matthew Johnson was still missing. And without him, every hearing, every statement, every update in the case felt incomplete. The community could talk about the charges. The courtroom could prepare for trial. But the heart of this case, the man whose life was taken, was still waiting somewhere in the upper part of the state. And until he was found, nothing about this tragedy could ever truly be at rest. The deeper investigators went, the more they uncovered, the clearer the picture became. This was not just the story of a crime. It was the story of a family that had been shattered long before the first police report was filed. Matthew Johnson was gone. Jennifer was behind bars awaiting trial. Her parents were charged with helping cover up what happened. And in the center of it all were 3 young children, who now carried a weight far beyond their years. These children didn't just lose one parent. They lost both. The father who loved them, and the mother who was supposed to guide them. Their lives changed in a single night. A night they didn't witness, A night they'll spend the rest of their lives trying to understand. The Johnson children now face birthdays without their father's voice, school events without either parent in the crowd, holidays with the memory of a home that once felt safe, but now carries a shadow they may never fully escape. For Matthew's relatives, every phone call from investigators brings a mixture of hope and fear. Hope that a new lead will finally bring him home. Fear that nothing new will be found. His siblings have spoken quietly about the pain of living in two different worlds. The world where they fight for answers, and the world where they try to protect the children from the full truth of what happened. The Gledhill family, on the other hand, faces a different kind of devastation. They are torn between the love they have for their daughter and the reality of the charges she faces. Some relatives find themselves replaying Jennifer's childhood, searching for clues, asking questions, wondering how the soft-spoken woman they once knew could be at the center of something so tragic. Others try to hold on to the belief that this case is more complicated than it appears, that something, anything, might explain the decisions that were made. But even within those quiet conversations, there is a recognition that the evidence is hard to ignore. For those in the military community, the grief comes with another layer. Matthew was not just a soldier. He was one of their own, a teammate, a leader, a man who carried the trust of the people around him. Special Forces communities are tight-knit. They move as one. They protect one another. And losing Matthew in such a painful and unjust way left a wound that no amount of training could prepare them for. Several of his teammates admitted that the hardest part isn't only his loss, but the fact that they can't bring him home. These are men trained to complete missions, to recover those who are missing, to never leave someone behind. But Matthew's resting place remains unknown. Friends search the foothills and fields on their own time. They meet on weekends. They comb through coordinates and terrain maps. They work in silence, driven by the belief that Matthew deserves to come home, that his children deserve a place to visit him, a place to remember him, a place to grieve without wondering. And even now, with the trial approaching, and the evidence pointing clearly in one direction, there is still a void in this case, a missing piece that has become the center of every conversation, every update, every plea from both sides of the family. Where is Matthew? The 50-year-old soldier who survived deployments, missions, harsh environments, and life-threatening conditions, was taken not by an enemy overseas, but in his own bedroom, and buried somewhere by the person he trusted most. The tragedy of this case cannot be measured by courtroom documents. It cannot be limited to charges or timelines or hearings. It is felt in the empty seats at school events, the quiet bedrooms once filled with laughter, the voices that will never be heard again, and the silence left behind by the one person who could answer every remaining question. A family was destroyed, not by circumstance, not by survival, but by a choice made in the quiet of the night. And the consequences of that choice will echo through generations. As this case moves closer to trial, and as investigators, soldiers, volunteers, and family members continue to search the fields and backroads of northern Utah, one truth sits at the center of everything. Matthew Johnson is still out there, somewhere, waiting to be found. The evidence tells a painful story. The recordings reveal the moments Jennifer thought no one would ever hear. The house exposes what happened behind closed doors. The timeline shows how far the cover-up went. The arrests of her parents add layers of deception no one expected. But none of it answers the one question that holds the deepest weight. Why? Why did a woman with 3 children choose this path? Why did she destroy every part of her life to pursue someone outside her marriage? Why did she plan each step so carefully? Why did she choose silence over the truth, even as the search for Matthew stretched across months? These are questions the courtroom cannot fully explain. Questions the evidence cannot interpret. Questions only Jennifer can answer, and ones she may never address. Matthew's loved ones continue to wait. His children continue to hope for closure. His teammates continue searching with a determination shaped by loyalty and respect. For them, this case isn't about headlines or hearings. It's about bringing home a man they cared for deeply. It's about the chance to finally lay him to rest. It's about ensuring his story does not end in uncertainty. Jennifer Gledhill's trial is set for December 8, 2025. 8 days in court. 8 days of arguments, evidence, witness testimony, and legal battles that will determine her future. But even when the verdict is announced, even when the sentence is read, this case will never feel complete until Matthew is found. Somewhere in northern Utah, A father, a soldier, a friend, a teammate. A man who gave so much of his life to serving others. Lies in a place only one person knows. And until the truth about his location is revealed, every update in this case will carry the same painful reminder. Matthew Johnson deserves to come home. If you followed this story, if you've listened to the timeline, the evidence, and the heartbreak left behind, remember that awareness matters. It keeps cases like this alive. It keeps pressure on those who hold the answers. And it honors the memory of those who cannot speak for themselves. Thank you for watching this documentary. And before we end this video, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. More stories, more truth, and more voices that deserve to be heard are coming. And together, we can continue to shine a light on the cases that need it most.